Welcome to the CEC Report for October 3rd. I'm Elisa Barwick and with me is Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Elisa.
Today we're going to discuss the transatlantic economy plummets, we need a Pacific pivoted recovery, and a credit system to fund the future. So first up, the transatlantic economy plummets. Now in the next segment we're going to be discussing a proposal to pull the world out of the depression from the Asian Pacific region. But first, to see why that's necessary, let's look at the drive to crush the transatlantic region. Now, most viewers are probably familiar because it's all over the news that there's a US government shutdown that, as of this recording, has been in progress for 3 days over a budget deadlock. Now, Obama wanted this, in fact, because he knew it would potentially damage Republicans much more than Democrats, and this is part of his strategy to try to get the House of Representatives back for the Democrats in 2014. Now, there are already economic repercussions of this shutdown, but October 17th is the date to watch because that is when the debt ceiling will be reached and could cause a US government default if they can't come to agreement.
Yeah, they've got $16 trillion of government debt that has to be funded, and without that debt increase, they can't operate. This is a significant problem, and I think it's being. Obama typically believes it's their own propaganda that the economy in America is okay, it's developing, which is a complete fraud, and it does have ramifications down here in Australia.
And this could have obviously worldwide implications because, as the London Financial Times said, October 17 looms as a potentially far more dangerous moment because it could trigger a technical default on US debt and turn America's domestic political standoff into a global crisis. So imagine what happened in Greece, but with the United States this time. Now, Obama did meet with top bankers for an hour on October 2nd, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all the big banks. They said, raise the debt ceiling so you can keep bailing us out or face the apocalypse, basically. Now, on the other side of the Atlantic, the drive for bail-in in Europe has been top priority for some time, but there have been some advances. Now, just for our newer viewers, Craig, do you want to describe what bail-in is?
Yeah, it's the mechanism that's being sought by the international bankers, like particularly the Financial Stability Board, which is run out of the Bank of International Settlements, to allow the banks to get hold of people's deposits and forcibly convert them into shares. Now, the banks have deposits in them. We all have deposits in the banks. Now, as far as the banks are concerned, we're called unsecured creditors. And that's a liability, it's a cost to them. So when they get into trouble, they want to lower their costs. So what they do is say, well, thanks very much, we're going to take your deposits and we're going to forcibly make you a shareholder in our bank. Right, so you become a part owner. Now that's what they did in Cyprus. And they literally shut down banks, they stole people's deposits. Now, in Australia we have 4 too big to fail banks. And we know from a 15th of October this year, 2013 report by the Financial Stability Board that bail-in, this idea of stealing people's deposits, legislation is in train for that here in Australia.
Yeah.
So this is a very serious problem, and at the moment, no one's really talking about it because this is politically dynamite. If the public know that this is in fact what our mandarins in the financial regulatory departments of the government are looking at.
And this is already being done. You wouldn't think that they could get away with it, but for example in Italy there has just been a partial bail-in of the Monte Paschi Bank, which is called MPS for short, the world's oldest active bank, founded in 1472. Now they just deliberately defaulted on interest on 2 categories of bonds that were due at the end of September. Now this was demanded of them as part of a deal for a broader bailout. The EU Commissioner wrote to them that it must be prevented as much as possible that this bailout money flow from the beneficiary to holders of hybrid papers and subordinated bonds. In other words, we'll give you all this money to bail out the bank, but not the people. We don't want them grabbing that money and running with it. We want to keep this bank afloat. And the IMF had just written instruction 2 in their latest report recommending bail-in for Italy on September 27, and they said essentially the same thing, that the resolution regime, that's the bail-in regime, should prevent shareholders from blocking recapitalisation and should include bridge banks and bail-in powers.
So this is not some isolated thing, some isolated policy. Elisa, here we have the Dodd-Frank bill with bail-in powers into the United States. Switzerland's got it, which you might say a few more things in a minute. Japan, France have got it. Other countries are looking at it right now. This is not a policy that is unknown. It's just not being reported on because literally they want to steal people's deposits.
And it's the precursor to the kind of fascist state that would be required to strip people of their entitlements, to loot the people every which way, basically in Cyprus, pensions don't exist anymore. The old age homes are shutting down. I mean, you're stripping money out of every place that you can in order to keep this bankrupt financial system afloat. And therefore, it's not surprising that there are rumblings in Greece of a coup. In Italy, there's discussion of a special Troika administration coming in with the political destabilisations that are going on at the moment. The Troika, of course, being the European Commission, the IMF and the European Central Bank, that they would bring in a alternative form of government, which one trade union leader described as being able to make the choices that no government of the people would be prepared to make. In Spain, they've made the decision that there will be no public sector wage increases to adjust for inflation for the 4th year in a row. They're cutting pensions. There'll be no more indexing for inflation. This is the sort of thing that's going on, but yet the Wall Street Journal protested on September 28th that various constitutional court decisions made in Portugal, Spain and Greece have upheld their respective post-war constitutions and therefore placed major obstacles in the way of Troika-dictated economic reform. So they're not getting as much as what they want. This Wall Street Journal article was a rehashing actually of a JP Morgan report that came out May 28th, which basically said there's too many anti-fascist provisions in the constitutions because they were all written post-war.
Or if you want to read between the lines, Elisa, what they're saying is the nation state is still too strong to allow us to literally wipe people off the face of the planet. We've said before on this program many times that the overarching policy of the British Empire, the British financial empire, is population reduction. The British Crown have come out and said, the Queen has come out and said, the population is a problem, we've got to reduce the world's population. And other people like Schellenhuber and so forth, whom people can see on our website, he wants to reduce the world's population as a representative, a knighted representative of the Queen, down to 1 billion people. This is the policy. How best to do it, other than to destroy the financial system of countries by, as we've seen in Cyprus, take people's deposits, lock up the economy. I mean, and all these austerity measures that you're seeing, these are not an accident. This is a deliberate policy, and until our policy sort of makers wake up and realise that there is a solution, go back to the idea of policies that support the nation state. And we might say a bit more about that in the next segment or so, but the point is nation state policies mean you go back to having a highly regulated financial and monetary system, and we talk about Glass-Steagall, which is separating away the legitimate necessary commercial banking system from the merchant investment banks that are all involved in derivatives, from the stockbroking houses and insurance companies that have all been bundled up into these huge, too big to fail banks now, right? Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is you've got to go with national banking and do what we did with the Commonwealth Bank during the war, and then you go with funding large-scale infrastructure projects. Now, we're going to talk more about this in the upcoming segments, but see, these are the direct policy initiatives that can be taken. But I might point out that the only organisation that for 25 years that has been pushing these sorts of policies for real economic development has been the CEC. And there's more movement towards these sorts of policies as the crisis gets worse. But in terms of how to do it, we're the only organisation that systematically put forward economic development programs to do it.
And the Swiss have just put up a motion for the Glass-Steagall Bank separation. This is the next step in what they've been pushing for a while. This new motion, if it passes, and they did get their last one passed, so if this one passes, it mandates the government to draft Glass-Steagall legislation. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes.
That will be very interesting for Australia, because a lot of people will be hearing about Glass-Steagall through our work.
That's right, and it'll have immediate ramifications through the financial system of the Swiss banks. Now, after the break, we'll talk about the Pacific pivoted recovery that we can go with. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Now we're going to discuss we need a Pacific pivoted recovery. We've just talked about how the transatlantic is going down into the dust, so we can use the Pacific region, and Australia should be a big part of that, to lift the entire world out of this dark age we're in. Now, in recent reports we've talked about the fact that China is pushing for the new Silk Road, part of the greater Eurasian land bridge, which the LaRouche organisation has pushed for years. Now there's more news that's come out of a September 23rd conference in Beijing, the International Astronautical Congress, which China has hosted, and it laid out a stunning perspective of China's space program. They intend to build their own space station in the 2020s. They have offered to train and fly foreign astronauts and carry science experiments on future Shenzhou spacecraft, which is their spacecraft, and they're already conducting extensive education and training programs. Now, they've initiated also, which is interesting for Australia, a regional body called the Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organisation, which began in 2008, and members of that grouping include Bangladesh, Iran, Mongolia, Pakistan, Peru, Thailand and Turkey. Indonesia, Malaysia and Tajikistan have also applied for membership, and member states are considering an array of 13 space research and technology projects, including earthquake detection. Now, add to that South Korea is bringing forward their timetable for their lunar exploration program. They want to land a man on the moon by in 2020 is what they're aiming for. Russia has just installed nuclear reactors on its first 2 floating nuclear power plants. So there's incredible motion towards the kind of development that could pull the world's economy out of the mess very rapidly. But where is Australia in all this? I mean, we could be a big part of this, and yet we're always on the other side of the coin.
Well, this is the question of the future, Elisa, because we have the world's second highest, or the highest reserves of thorium, which is a radioactive element that doesn't create the byproducts of plutonium and so forth. We should be mining that and beginning to develop a thorium-based nuclear energy sector, but we're not. We've of course got the second highest reserves of uranium. Actually the highest reserves of uranium around the world, and we're only just making a small contribution to the development of nuclear power.
Yeah,
we're mining as much as, well, not even as much as we can, but the future of what we have to do exists in the future of both thermonuclear fusion and thermonuclear fission powered processes.
Yeah, Lyndon LaRouche's organisation has put out a report pushing for a thermonuclear trans-Pacific development perspective. Now, this would extend from the Mississippi River in the United States, across the Pacific Ocean, into the far inland of the Eurasian continent and north to the Arctic, which is a very resource-rich region, to raise the world out of this dark age. Now, a thermonuclear NAWAPA project, which is the North American Water and Power Alliance, would act as the gateway to the global fusion economy, a type of Manhattan program for fusion power. And as LaRouche has stated in this report, fusion power is the precondition for the future of mankind on this planet. Now, why is fusion the key though, Craig? Because couldn't we do this with solar power panels everywhere, or?
Well, can you put sunlight in your pocket? I can't put solar power or wind power in my pocket. I mean, it's so diffuse in terms of energy that it's actually why it's being pushed by the British as a means of depopulating the planet. You go with solar or wind power, you're going to depopulate the planet because it doesn't have what is called the energy flux density. Now, for the benefit of our listeners, what we're talking about here is thermonuclear fusion. It's not the same as of fission, nuclear fission, because fission is what we talk about when we bring together elements of plutonium, right? And you bring them together.
You're splitting the
atoms,
so to
literally,
speak. Yeah.
right? By bringing together radioactive elements like plutonium, which comes from uranium after it's being processed and so forth, and that gives out a certain amount of energy. So that's called fission. However, fusion power, Elisa, is where you take these heavy molecules of hydrogen, and under high pressure and high temperatures you push them together and you end up with a net excess of energy, creating what's called plasmas and so forth. Now, this is in experimental stages at the moment. There's been all sorts of breakthroughs that are never reported in the media here, but this means you have an enormous amount of energy that can be then put into various processes, manufacturing processes and so forth, that can transform our economy. We're talking about a thermonuclear fusion economy, something that we're on the cusp of right now.
And this opens up entire new resources, doesn't it, Craig? Because, for example, you've got this proposal which came about in the 1970s. The technology was all pioneered by the 1980s and ready to go for a fusion torch, which is using a high temperature plasma to take whatever you put in it. So, you know, your landfill, everything out of your garbage bin, you know, digging up dirt, and it returns everything from those high temperatures to its constituent elements. And the LaRouche report was saying that, for example, in a cubic mile of dirt, this is what you could get out of it. Approximately 200 times the amount of annual US aluminium production, 8 times the iron production, 100 times the tin, and 6 times the zinc. So that's what's in a cubic mile of dirt. So you're talking about an entirely new system of economics opening up once you make the translation to a new form of energy production that will open up whole new resource bases to fuel economic growth.
And to come back to your original question about why not solar, it comes back to this question of where is the energy coming from, and solar energy doesn't even rate. You have to look at what energy flux density actually is, where the power comes from. And I've got a graphic here, Elisa, which I found very, very, very interesting. If you just take, for example, 0.57 of a gram of fusion fuel, like deuterium or tritium, that's the equivalent energy, and something just like a speck, is the equivalent energy of 23.5 tonnes of wood, if you had to burn that wood, or 6.15 tonnes of coal. And right throughout our history, if you have a look at the second graphic I want to put up there, you can see the energy flux density of various types of power sources, from wood, from coal, from petroleum. And as you see, as you get more and more dense forms of power, you end up with more and more energy being able to be released, which is then put into the processes of manufacturing and various other processes where we can literally transform, as you say, a cubic kilometre mile of dirt and extract out these sorts of resources. Now, this is a huge area for discussion, but it is the direction that we have to move in.
But there's been deliberate policy to stop this, and in fact, during the 1970s, when Lyndon LaRouche, the head of our international movement, founded the Fusion Energy Foundation, and we were on the cutting edge of work with the Japanese, with other leading figures in Europe, etc., that were pushing the fusion research. There was actually a Wall Street club of bankers and financiers that was started up to oppose this, and they used the media and various other conduits to put a dampener on all of this. And of course, consequently, technology that was available in the 1970s and should have been developed, it's now making progress. However, most of the official layers say it's still 30 years off, but it's available now. We can do it now. So after the break, we're going to talk about how we can fund this kind of development project. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Now we're going to talk about a credit system to fund the future. Now, we've just come through an election, and of course you hear politicians constantly talking about the future. We're the party for the future, rah rah, but of course they're all hollow words. It's easy to talk about the future and not be held to account for it when you speak in such general terms. Now, LaRouche has a very specific concept of the future, and I just wanted to quote him from his weekly report last week on September the 25th. He said, "Mankind's mind is distinguished by its ability to alter the future voluntarily. We live in the future, we live for the future, and only mankind does that."
Yeah, I can't see a cow developing thermonuclear fusion for the benefit of all cows, can you?
No, exactly. No. That's the point. Now, we need a banking system that will facilitate the kind of visionary concepts that man is capable of coming up with to bring them about. And it's very obvious that there's no other party that has any sense of this. I mean, during the election, there was one incident that struck me where Kevin Rudd was on Q&A and he was asked by a nurse in aged care about funding because of the resources that they lack. And he very clearly could not deny what she was saying about the lack of resources, and yet he had no comeback whatsoever, as most of them on the campaign trail had. Because they're beholden to this international financial system. They only are willing to operate within that system. So it's only if we break that and create a financial system that will act almost invisibly as almost a shadow behind the economy is how we're going to make this function. And Ben Chifley talked about this in a brilliant way in 1947 when he was trying to make the kind of national banking that funded the war effort and created an economic powerhouse in Australia permanent. And of course he had a massive fight to do this and ultimately was driven out of office over it. But he said, essentially, the task of the new banking organisation will be to provide a financial mechanism appropriate to the needs of our rapidly growing economy. Australia is destined to see great developments in the coming years, and this process, which is already underway, must be promoted by every means possible. There will be a great increase in our population. Industries will expand in all fields, and we must expand our markets abroad. The basic services of transport and communications, water supply, power, housing, health and education must be enlarged to meet the needs of a larger economy working at high levels of technique and productivity. The stress everywhere will be upon new forms of enterprise, new methods of production, and new uses of the resources of this country. Finance must cooperate and take the initiative in this process. The banking system must anticipate these needs and be in the field with the right kinds of facilities to assist and encourage such developments. Now, I mean, this is the direct opposite of what we've got today, where banking's primary.
Where does derivatives fit in? You know, the gambling of the entire system with
making
the 21...
money out of money and...
Exactly. Look, Chifley knows what he's talking about because during the war he participated in really the expansion of the Australian economy to prosecute the war. Right throughout the period of the depressions, and if you have a look at this chart that I've done up, you'll see that there was actually no increase in finances from 1929 through to basically the beginning of the war, Elisa. In other words, the Conservative government at that point literally politically decided to stagnate the Australian economy, to crucify people. But when Curtin and Chifley came in, they actually began to use the Commonwealth Bank to create the credit to really expand the war economy necessary to prosecute the war. And you can see this in this particular graph with the green lines here, how the Commonwealth Bank was actually used to expand the economy through credit. And we don't have much time to go through this anymore, but it's a political decision coming to banking.
Look at our press release that we put out this week on this subject.
Yeah, it's purely political how the financial and banking system works, and it's nothing else, and people shouldn't be fooled by anything else.
So everyone that's listening should join our campaign. On our website we've got details of a very big campaign to stop bail-in and to usher in Glass-Steagall. That's what we need immediately to get out of this mess. So thanks for tuning in to another CEC report, and hope to see you all again next week.